If I asked you what the chief intellectual virtue is, what would you say? Intelligence, creativity, tenacity, open-mindedness? While all of these are important and each contributes in essential ways to the life of the mind, none of them is the chief intellectual virtue. That honor belongs to curiosity. George MacDonald says, repose is not the end of education. Its end is a noble unrest, an ever-renewed awaking from the dead, a ceaseless questioning of the past for the interpretation of the future, an urging on of the motions of life, which had better far be accelerated into fever than retarded into lethargy. Restlessness, MacDonald says, is the engine that drives education. But what promotes the type of restlessness he's on about here? If this restlessness is not to be imposed from the outside, which it must not be, because that would be a frenetic rather than an organic energy, then it must be driven and motivated from within the student. It is curiosity that drives the student on from glory to glory, secure in the belief that though this present glory is worth seeing, there is always something else worth seeing. Curiosity makes us ask about the customs of other peoples. Curiosity calls us to slow down and listen to their stories. Curiosity helps us properly imagine historical distance. Curiosity leads us to ask questions whose answers are not yet apparent. MacDonald goes on to say, the right teacher would have his pupils easy to please, but ill to satisfy, ready to enjoy, unready to embrace, keen to discover beauty, slow to say, here I will dwell. It's my intention to talk here a little bit about the nature of this curiosity, about how classical education brings it forth in students, and how parents can come alongside curiosity in supporting their children's education. So first, I want to talk about curiosity as chief intellectual virtue. Curiosity is a subspecies of wonder. It is what happens when we intentionally direct wonder at something specific. Normally, wonder arises spontaneously in our souls in response to some great stimulus. I see an amazing tree and I'm struck and I begin to wonder. But in the case of curiosity, we stir up wonder within ourselves, in effect, turning the object of our attention into the type of great thing that arouses wonder. Curiosity is then the intentional giving of attention to something that we suspect may be worthy of it. And this is why children are so naturally curious. Not yet abused by the disillusionment that comes with so many disappointments, like their adult colleagues, they remain confident that each thing that exists is a wonder. They remember what we have forgotten, that existence itself is a wonder. And if God deigned to call this thing out of non-being, it must in some way be of interest. Curiosity is then a way of bestowing honor upon things. Or rather, it is a way of allowing things to have the honor that naturally belongs to them. I sometimes have trouble connecting to certain kinds of people. The kinds of people who don't read, or who only read very dry and informational things. Probably unfairly, they remind me of Eustace Scrubb, before his change. It is not that they are tedious or beastly like Eustace, it is rather that I have trouble finding common ground on which we can all stand. And so I was given the advice that the best way to navigate such social situations is by becoming more curious about the people I'm speaking with. My natural instinct was to disengage, but I was told, no, lean in, become more curious. Each one of those people is an immortal image of God destined to live on forever in glory or despair. Each one of them was chosen by God for existence in preference to any number of other possible persons who could have been brought into existence. Therefore, there is something worthy about them. Of that, I can be certain theologically, even before I have discovered it experientially. If I'm finding it to be so buried that my particular lens for looking at people has trouble detecting it, the solution is to dig deeper, to ask more questions, to get them talking longer, and so by these means to come to recognize what I know ahead of time to be true of them. The solution, in other words, is to be curious about them. Now, this is an image of the way that curiosity can transform that which on first glance seems unworthy of attention into something that is not only worthy of attention, but worthy of intense attention. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all believed that philosophy begins in wonder. What they mean by wonder is something that I find a little insufficient. They seemed to have in mind the situation in which someone is ignorant of the cause of a phenomenon and wonders what the cause might be. I wonder why water's falling from the sky. What's causing that? This leads them to ask questions, and that leads to philosophy. Now, while I think this is a very weak account of what wonder is, I happen to think that the intuition they all have is true. All philosophy does begin in wonder. We just need to deepen our understanding of what wonder is a bit. In my work on the theology of wonder, I define wonder as an ecstasy of the soul, excited by the newness, unexpectedness, and otherness of a reality. What I mean here is that we encounter some external reality as new, unexpected, and other, and this causes us to wonder. In the case of curiosity, which is, as it were, self-directed wonder, we turn to something outside of ourselves with the expectation that we will see in it newness, unexpectedness, or meaningful otherness. Curiosity is thus always, in some sense, an act of faith. We look on things not as they present themselves to us at first blush, but as we believe in our hearts they are able to be. This is very powerful when brought to bear on the educational enterprise. For what education, and especially classical education, trains is not in the first instance the student's knowledge, but rather the student's perception. In education, we are offered other ways of looking at the world, and as we progress through a succession of such ways of viewing the world, we are developing that way that will become our own peculiar outlook. It is this possession of a unique way of looking at the world and ultimately God that renders each human person inexpressibly and irreplaceably valuable. For nothing looks to me exactly the way it looks to you, and therefore you cannot see God the way that I do unless I show him to you, unless I lend you my eyes. Curiosity is paramount in the project of learning to see the world differently, because curiosity is the intentional glance turned upon the world that aims precisely to see more than it has yet seen of it. When I get curious about something, I'm open to learning more about it, to seeing it in a new way, to the realization that it is other than what I thought it was. Curious eyes are ever new, and ever conferring new newness upon the things around them, not by forcing our prejudices upon them, but rather by clearing away the weeds of prejudice and allowing things to show themselves anew and as new. So if a student should ask me why they should study Latin, and I respond that they should do so because it will increase their scores on standardized tests and make it easier for them to get into college, then they're very unlikely to get interested in the study of Latin, except insofar as they are interested in the ends I have said it is useful for attaining. But if I tell them that Latin will train them to hear differently, opening them up to new rhythms, sounds, cadences, and possibilities for speaking meaningfully, and speaking musically, they are much more likely to become interested. They may desire any of these things for themselves, or they may not. But even if they don't, they may also become so curious about how such a thing should be possible that they dig in. How can the study of a dead language teach you to hear new things and to hear familiar things in new ways? Even if one is not at all concerned to speak musically or, God forbid, meaningfully, nevertheless, one might still come to the conclusion that it is worth seeing how such things could be possible. And so, all the best learning that has ever gone on from the beginning of the world until now has been carried out under the aegis of curiosity. The thing that keeps your students, teachers, school administrators, scholars like myself, and, God willing, you parents, coming back to the life of the mind and of learning and of reading day after day and year after year is curiosity. The questions by which we are all driven, the questions by which all human striving and learning is driven are, what else is there to see? What might we learn next? What remains yet to be thought?